Hi guys, I'm Coral. Welcome back to my channel. Please buckle yourself in, make sure you have a drink, use the bathroom if you need to, because I read 14 books this month. I'm just gonna go over kind of like this weird stats that I keep about the type of books I read, how many pages, the years that they were published and all that. If you've watched my wrap-up videos before, you know what I'm talking about, but if you haven't, this is what I'm talking about. So in total, I read 14 books this month. If we're talking about genres, I read 7 horror books, 3 fantasy, 1 thriller, a sci-fi novel, 1 paranormal book, and 1 book that's like nonfiction, medical history. I read 5,587 pages this month, which is about 180 pages a day. With my running total of the page goal that I had for this year, after February, right, that was last month, right? I had 26,193 pages to read to get to my goal. And then after this month, I have 2,606. So I'm doing well. Another one of my goals this year was to make sure that I'm reading books that I own, instead of constantly gravitating towards things that maybe I rent from the library, or not that there's anything wrong with the library, but the thing is that I buy a bunch of books and then I'm like, ooh, look at this shiny book I don't own, and like I buy it and I read it, or I rent it from the library and I read it. So trying to read books that I own. I ended up reading 9 of the 14 I read this month were books that I owned previous to this year. Well, there's one that I reread this year, or there's one that I reread this month, so I didn't count that into that total, even though I did own it, but it's like, it's not making a space on my TBR, you know what I mean? So the years that these books were published, the oldest book this year was published in 1990. I had a book from 1999, a book from 2000, one from 2006, one from 2007. Then we jump up to 2012, 2016, 2 from 2017, 3 from 2020, and 2 2021 releases. Giving my books a star rating, which like, I don't know. I kind of stopped talking about that on my channel. I more go like, did I like this book? Did I not like it? Because I feel like star ratings are so arbitrary. But if I'm talking about star ratings, minus the book I didn't rate this month, because there was one I didn't rate, I had an average star rating of 3.9, which is really good. But also, I read 14 books, so like some of them were not as good as others. We'll get into that. I read 12 books that were novels. I read 1 novella and 1 short story collection. 13 of these books were considered adult. 1 was young adult. I read 10 physical books. I listened to 3 audiobooks, and I read 2 ebooks. Then I also had, let's see, I read 2 of my 5-star predictions for this year, which were Jurassic Park and The Descent. I'll get into that. And then also the book that fit into the buzzword for this month. The word was time, I think, and I chose The Great Mortality, An Intimate History of the Black Death, the most devastating plague of all time. Okay, honestly, it is a beautiful day out. I have my windows in my room open. It smells like freshly cut grass because my neighbor was mowing their lawn. My lawn really needs to be mowed. But it's just, I don't know, I have a good feeling about this video. But it is going to be kind of long. But also, there are a couple books that I'm not going to talk about today because they will fit into trope videos. Let's just get into it. I'm just taking up more of your time. Okay, so I'm going to start with this book. This book I added to my total for this month, but I actually finished it on the very last day of February. However, I had filmed my wrap-up before then, so I didn't include it in that. So I just, you know, included it in this one. So this is A Court of Silver Flames by Sarah J. Maas. This is part of her A Court of Thorns and Roses series. This is a new release. It is like 750 something pages. It was massive and heaping. I liked this book mostly because I really love the characters that she has created for this series. However, it was very character driven, so there was not a lot of action, which is really just unlike the rest of the books this series has had so far. This book is also a little bit different because the main characters in the last 3 books, or the last 4 I guess, there's like a little kind of novella thingy, are not the main characters in this one. So this has different main characters. And I think she did really well with making these the focus and not focusing so much on the other 2 characters that were kind of the main characters in the other books. But it also seemed kind of weird because it didn't seem like those characters, the last main characters, were the same characters. You know what I mean? It was like their personalities all of a sudden were very different. And okay, so I really liked this. I liked it a lot, but it really felt kind of like fan service. There are a lot of sex scenes in this, and sometimes her like wordage is very cringy because she uses a lot of like euphemisms and things like that, and it's just like I giggle because it makes me uncomfortable, but not because there's sex, but because of the language she uses. It's just like so weird, and I really like reading it out loud to my partner, and he hates it. So I guess if you like this series, it's very likely you'll like this book because, like I said, you know, we're with the characters that we love so much, but I really honestly don't like it as much as I've liked the previous books in the series. Next off my pile, this is The Great Mortality by John Kelly. This is a history of Yersinia pestis, which is the bacteria that causes the Black Plague, which Yersinia pestis, it can cause bubonic plague, pneumonic plague, or is it pneumatic? Oh my god. And also septicemic plague. So really the Black Death was mostly bubonic and oh my god, this is gonna be, I don't think I can just like flip open and see where it says that. I'm gonna call it pneumonic. However, if it's really pneumatic, I don't think it's pneumatic. Oh my god, what's wrong with me? So anyways, before I get too caught up on that, this was a really comprehensive history of the Black Death and how we think it originated and why we think it like hit the human race so hard. And yeah, it goes through Asia, it goes through history in Europe, different European countries like Italy, France, England, and how really kind of how geography and culture made this plague different in different places. It was really interesting. It was written well. It was a little bit dense, and this is one of the books that I read some of it and I listened to some of it on audio like throughout the day when I couldn't be reading, and I was glad to have access to the audio. This was on Scribd, so you could find it on there if you you know, subscribe to that, and I thought it was really good. But like I said, a little bit dense sometimes. I was glad to be able to listen to it and not have to read the whole thing, I guess. Next I have The Worm and His Kings by Hailey Piper. This is a novella, it's pretty short, and the main character, the person that we're following, is Monique. She is looking for her girlfriend, and she thinks her girlfriend was taken by this thing that she's been seeing in this tunnel that she lives in, because Monique is homeless at the moment. And it's like this big, like hulking tall, like raptor clawed monster that she calls Grey Hill, and it just like kind of like moans and sings, and it's really interesting at first, I thought. So then we get into it, and this ends up being kind of a cosmic horror book. which I think I've decided is just not for me. So this book I didn't rate because I really think that this is a case of it's not this book, it's me. The writing was good, I read it all the way through, I just like didn't care for the plot. I don't care about this like existential horror where I don't know, like a god is going to eat me. I just don't care for that. I don't find it very interesting, but I did really enjoy Monique in this book, and I wish that I could maybe see her again in a different story, a story that isn't necessarily, you know, cosmic horror, because she was so determined and she was so steadfast, and she's stubborn and she's searching for her girlfriend and will give up at nothing, you know, to find her and to help her. So I'm not saying don't read this book. I'm never ever saying that. In fact, I'm saying if you like cosmic horror, or if, you know, you're experimenting with it, or it's kind of hit or miss for you, this might be a great book for you to check out. I really wanted to like it, but I am looking forward to reading more of Hailey Piper's work. There's one that she wrote previous to this called, I think it's called Benny Rosa Cannibal King, which is kind of like an urban legend horror book, which actually sounds right up my alley. So that's one where when I'm buying books again, that's one that I'm going to definitely pick up for myself. Next, I have the two other books that I ended up listening to on audio this month. The first one is The Final Empire by Brandon Sanderson, and then The Well of Ascension by Brandon Sanderson. And honestly, March felt so long that I didn't even realize that I had read this month. I thought that I had read this last month. Yeah, so the narrator for this is so excellent. He also narrates Brandon Sanderson's Way of King series, which is like my bedtime book that I listen to help me fall asleep. I do that every night, and it honestly really helps with my anxiety thoughts that I get that like keep me from sleeping, because I'm like, what if my car drives off a cliff? And I'm like, I don't drive on cliffs, but my brain's like, but what if? And then I have to like think about it a bunch, you know what I mean? So listening to audiobooks really helps with that. Let me find the narrator. What's his name? I think it's Michael Reading. Michael Kramer is his name. So he is fantastic if you're interested in listening to this audio. I can't tell you about Well of Ascension, obviously, but The Final Empire is this like gritty, almost like a heist book, but in a really good way. It takes place in this city called Luthadel. There are these people called allomancers, and they're able to kind of like swallow metals and use certain ones to do certain things. And it's way cooler than that sounds, because, okay, Zach read these before I did, and he's like, I love this series so much, and I'm like, how? I really like The Way of Kings better, but reading these books, oh boy, especially the second one, this book is so fucking good. I think it might be one of my most favorite books of all time. In this one, the ending is probably the best ending of any book I've read ever. It's just, they're so good, and the world is so rich, and I love all the characters so much, and there's just the right amount of, I don't know, what am I trying to, like the stakes are high, but it's not like George R.R. Martin high, but it's also not like Sarah J. Maas high, where it's like, you know, no one's gonna die here, and it's not like, it's not quite like George R.R. Martin, where it's like, probably everyone's gonna die, you know what I mean? So, it has a good balance of like, worrying about the characters that I love, because they might go, but also they might not, hopefully, and I don't know, does that make sense? It's just a really great book. Okay, next up, Paradise Club by Tim Meyer. This I did a more in-depth review on, so I'll leave the link to that in my description in case you're wondering more about that, because I'm just gonna make this quick because I read a lot of books and because, you know, I talked about it in length. But this is about a family who wins a trip to the very exclusive Paradise Club, which is like, they take a cruise to get to this island, and then, you know, there's a resort on this island. But very soon after docking at this island, they discover that it's not as it seems, And the owner of this resort is playing this crazy game where he just lets a bunch of serial killers off onto this island to kill everybody. And of course, you know, they want to try to stop it. This is like a slasher. There are lots of fun killers in this, killing people in lots of fun different ways. It's very gory. There's lots of like visceral, like body, I don't know if it's necessarily body horror, but there's lots of like gory sequences in this, and people running and hiding and people trying to escape and stuff. So I think this felt a little repetitive to me at times, but there is kind of a reason for that. If you watch my review, I kind of go into that more. If you'd like to hear about that, make sure you watch that. This is Paradise Club. Okay, next I would like to talk about Anoka by Shane Hawk. This was a copy he sent to me for review, so thank you so much. And I ended up liking this a lot. I thought it was a really great short debut collection from the author. This is a collection of short stories that deal with Indigenous horror. I felt like the author did a really great job kind of showing us what he's gonna be about, because this is a debut. There are only a couple different stories in this, but I feel like it had a good variety. There's short fiction, there's flash fiction, there's a lot of different themes he deals with, like addiction and family, and not feeling right in your own body. And I can't wait to see what else he comes out with. This I also did a more in-depth review on, and I'll leave the description to that in my, or I'll leave the link to that in my description as well, if you'd like to check that out. And I really think that you should probably check Anoka out. Okay, next I want to talk about one that I didn't think was so good. This is The Children of Red Peak by Craig DiLouie. And Craig DiLouie's written a couple books, but I've only read one, and that was Stuff for the Children, which came out a few years ago, which I thought was really good and kind of like an unsung book of terror. I don't know, what am I saying? It was good, and I don't hear people talk about it very often. So that's a great one if you want to check that out. This, I had high hopes for. This is about this group of people who as children were the survivors of a cult that disappeared, really. Nobody knows what happened. All the adults and a lot of the other children, there's only like, I think like 5 children who end up being there when everyone else disappears, the only remaining people. So as far as like the writing goes and the plot, it alternates between these people as adult survivors and them as children, leading up to where this weird event happens. And as adults, some of them are kind of torn on what happened because something weird did happen. And even they don't know what happened to their parents and their peers. It's very strange. They come together after the suicide of one of their friends and fellow survivors, and at that point they need to make a decision whether they really want to figure out what happened or whether they just want to move on with their lives. I really did like the parts of this that were looking back at the past and them as children, you know, how their families got into this cult and things like that. Obviously cults don't really start out that way. Usually they start out as kind of religious groups that I don't know. There's one part in this book where they talk about cults that make self-fulfilling prophecies about an apocalyptic event. So it's self-fulfilling because they make their own apocalypse, but then they're also kind of like justified because they knew that this apocalypse was going to happen, even though they created it themselves. A little bit of kind of personal stuff. This book made me really anxious when I was reading it because my parents were never married. They were like really never together after I was born. So I've always had like a split family, and my dad eventually remarried to somebody and they became very religious, and it was super spooky sometimes. They really loved talking about the apocalypse, and I really think that they were, I don't know, sometimes I think, especially after reading this, sorry, there were some birds outside. Especially while reading this and seeing how these families get into this religious group that eventually becomes a cult, because like I said, cults don't start out that way usually. It's like, I feel like in my childhood, I was maybe only one enigmatic, crazy person away from being in a situation like this, because the person my dad married, she was very into apocalyptic things, and she was always fantasizing about like having to move up into the mountains and being self-sustaining. And when I was in middle school, one of the popes died, and in the middle of the night she wanted us to watch his funeral because she was convinced that he was the Antichrist and he was going to rise from the dead. And I just like can't stop thinking about, like, what if there was a person like this preacher in this book that, you know, my family had met. And I don't know, it was making me very anxious thinking about that. But that aside, I don't know if everyone would have that feeling about this, obviously. I think this was very character driven as well, which if you liked the characters in this would be great, but I thought that they were kind of boring and kind of like a stereotypical cast of characters of people who would, or how people would have coped after being in a traumatic event like this. Like, one's a therapist and one does, what is it called? Deprogramming, and like deprogramming people's brains after they're in organizations like this. And one is a musician, and it's like, of course, because what else could they have done? So anyways, I didn't love this. I thought it was kind of boring. Some people loved it though. So, you know, it is a cult book. If you like fictional cults, maybe you would like this. Oh, I have to say, okay, so this is kind of weird. A little bit weird. In Craig DiLouie's last, I think it was his last book. But anyways, in the book that he wrote, Stuff for the Children, there was a very minor character named Coral. And I've never read my name in a book before. Like, I don't see people named Coral. And then in this book, the place where this church starts out at is like near where I live. Like, it's like one of the surrounding towns. My sister-in-law lived there, and it was kind of weird. Because, you know, it's like this small, kind of like mountainy, Central Valley, California town that nobody has ever heard of, except for that it's in this book. It's kind of weird. Okay, so the next two here I'm going to talk about real quick. Like very, very quickly, because I'm going to be talking about them in different trope videos this year. The first one is The Night of the Chupacabra by Michael Hebler. This was a cryptid Western horror book, horror Western. So this follows a man named Drake, and in the very beginning, he and his family are traveling out west somewhere. I don't know where their, you know, origin point was, I guess, but on the trail they get attacked by this creature, and this creature is like terribly hard to kill, and it ends up murdering like almost everyone he's with, burning their wagons to a crisp, and he thinks that he sees his wife get away. Kind of comes to a town where a bunch of things like culminate, and this creature is following him at this point, and it's not attacking him, but it is kind of attacking anybody he comes into contact with. And it's a chupacabra. I mean, that's not, I guess, a spoiler. The title is The Night of the Chupacabra. So I liked the writing in this. Some of the story was really fun and engaging. There were a lot of action-packed sequences, but then also there were a lot of parts that was like, I don't know why this has to be in this book. It's kind of boring, and I kind of had to slog through it. Sorry, I have something in my eyeball. And I also thought the writing was a little bit heavy-handed on the like westerny dialogue, like tonight and what you do that for, and get out of here, and you know, lots of that. And it's like, we don't necessarily need that because we know that it's already old-timey. So I thought it was okay. I don't know if I'd continue on with the series. Maybe, I don't know. But I enjoyed reading it. Then I have My Sister Rosa by Justine. Ooh, I looked this up and now I forgot already. Larbalestier, I think it is. This is like a young adult psychological thriller, and it follows this teenage boy named Che, and he thinks his younger sister Rosa might be a psychopath. She just kind of doesn't have remorse or empathy when she does bad things. In fact, she really likes doing bad things and likes manipulating people. And yeah, like I said, I'm not gonna get too far into this, but I ended up liking this. Okay, so I also read the next book in the Bone Season series by Samantha Shannon. This one was The Song Rising, and it continues on with the story of Paige Mahoney, and she is somebody who can use like occultomancy. She can send her spirit from her body and like physically attack other people's spirits and like possess them. So this is like in a world where stuff like that is absolutely expressly forbidden. Like you will be executed by the government if they think that you're doing this. So there's kind of like an uprising and stuff, and this is the third book, and I think the first two were much better than this one, but like there was some important stuff in this too. It just was more of a book where the characters are traveling a lot, which I just don't like. I think I just don't like that. I don't like it. It's boring to me. It was still a fine book. It just wasn't as good as the first and second in my opinion. Then I read one of my most anticipated reads for a long time. Cats. Birds outside. I have a bush outside my window, and the cats love it. So this is Tenders of Flesh by Agustina Bazterrica. This was translated by Sarah Moses. The author is from Argentina, right? I think I did this last time too. Yeah, she's from Argentina. And this book originally came out in 2017. So it was out for a couple years before it was translated to English. And boy, this is a crazy like horror dystopian book where on this earth, in this timeline of Earth, all animal meat has become poisonous to humans. And it's not just animal meat, it's like if you get scratched or bit by an animal, like if a bird attacks you and you get scratched by its talons, you'll die, supposedly. And so, you know, they've killed all like the animals on this, or tried to kill all the animals, and they don't eat meat from animals anymore. They don't eat animal protein. But they don't just like decide to eat plant protein because we're humans and we're selfish as fuck. They decide to start breeding humans to eat human flesh. They call it special meat, special kidneys, special tenderloin, special burgers. So it's like really twisted. The main character, his name is Tejo, and he works in like a processing plant where they have a lot of different things going on. I think the biggest thing is that they raise and kill they call them head. They raise and kill the head, which is the human. And it's really awful. And I've seen a lot of people recently actually say that the author is trying to like take a dig on the meat industry as we know it, where we're eating animal protein, but I really feel like it's not so much that, although like there are parallels and maybe we should look at them. But I think this is more of like an exploration of what we would do if we couldn't have animal protein. And it's pretty twisted. I like this a lot, and it was very compelling. Like I just wanted to sit and read it. But there were a couple parts, particularly there's this place that Tejo visits again and again, and it was like, why is he here? Like I just don't care about him being here, really. So if I gave it a star rating, it would be 4 out of 5. Although I really did like this. I think it is great, and I think lots of people should read this. It's kind of groundbreaking, I think. But there is some instances of cruelty towards animals and also a lot of cruelty towards human beings. So if you're squeamish from that, if you're squeamish about the animal stuff, there's only a couple instances of that, and it was easy to just like skip a couple paragraphs. But of course the cruelty towards human beings is like, that's what this book is about. So you might not be able to skip over that if you're squeamish to that, but I really think this is a great book. Well worth the read. And look at this fucking cover. I love this cover so much. It's very striking. Okay, so the last 2 books I read this month were 5-star predictions for 2021. That's the year we are in. Oh my god. The first one here is Jurassic Park by Michael Crichton. This is a book I have let sit on my shelves for way too long. I ended up loving this fucking book. It was so good. This is Jurassic Park, like the movie Jurassic Park, if for some reason you've not seen the movie. So this is about this kooky old man named Hammond. His last name is Hammond. I can't remember his first name because everyone just gets called by their last names in this book. And he has this great idea to start cloning dinosaurs and create an amusement park. And he's very different. Really, a lot of the characters are very different from the characters in the movie, which was kind of refreshing because it wasn't just like reading a book based on the screenplay, you know what I mean? And he has somebody, a lawyer from his investors, coming to check on the park and see how it's doing because it has not opened yet, but they're getting very close to being able to open. And everything fucking goes wrong. It's like everything you could think of that could possibly go wrong starts going wrong. And it was just, it's so much fun. It's like fun to read because it's interesting, and it's fun to read because they have like all these like fun graphs in it all the time. Let me see if I can find one. Just like different graphs about different stuff, and like all this like fun made up data and like made up fun science that's made up but seems like it could be true, you know what I mean? And it was just such a good book. This was a 5-star read for me for sure. It was so much fun. And if you haven't read Jurassic Park, if you're somebody who likes dinosaurs, and if you're somebody who likes like made up but plausible science, or somebody who likes science fiction, or somebody who likes books about everything going wrong, definitely check out Jurassic Park. I'm really upset that I let this sit on my shelf for literally years without picking it up. Like, what the fuck was I thinking? Such a great book. Then we have The Descent by Jeff Long. This is a thick ass book. It was thick and it was dense. Like, it was taking me forever. I spent probably like 2 weeks reading this, I think, which is crazy because I would sit down and read for hours, it felt like, and like not make much progress, which is one of like the qualms, one of the only qualms I have about this book. This is about these weird things that start happening on Earth, and we think we have found these subterranean humanoid things that are similar to humans in some ways, but very dissimilar in others. Also, like, they live underground, so it's spooky. And they like to eat humans and keep humans as slaves. And it's just such, I don't know, the plot is huge. It is such a big, complex plot. And this book goes in directions that I didn't think it would go. And that is like a good thing in my book, I think. In my book. So I don't know, I think that's all I can tell you about the plot itself because it is so big and it would take me so long to really give you a good feel for how this book goes. But I think if you like books about like exploration, weird like relics and artifacts, and it seems kind of like the Da Vinci Code in some ways. I haven't read the book though. I've only seen the movie, honestly. That's not really my type of reading stuff, but like weird religious mysteries that aren't overly about the religion itself, if that makes sense, because I am a person who does not practice religion, and I get easily bored and turned off if it's too religious-y. But I think that it was like religious history kind of, and not like people practicing the religion, if that makes sense. It was a really great book and I enjoyed my time reading it. It constantly surprised me, but it was very dense and it was hard to read, and there were lots of parts that like I had to reread to get the message, you know what I mean? And I was like, am I stupid, or is this writing weird? I couldn't tell. It seemed like at some points the author was being like purposely vague so that we would have to decide on our own what was happening, but I didn't like that. Because it wasn't like an ambiguous ending where, you know, you get to decide for yourself. It was like vague facts, ambiguous facts, kind of, where it's like, well, I would like to know this for when I carry on with this story. I don't know if any of this is making sense, but there are also definitely some very questionable racial things that are said in this book, and it's not necessarily the characters being racially insensitive and dealing out microaggressions. It's like the narrative. There's one character who is a nun and she works abroad, and when we first meet her in this story, she's working with a colony of lepers in Africa, and it's very much like, oh, these poor dumb black folks, you know what I mean? And it's like kind of icky. So that's like, I think, the most egregious scene with that sort of stuff in it. But she definitely kind of has like a white savior thing going on, even when we're talking about these subterranean dwellers that we meet. Do with that info as you will. Deal with that as you would like. Hey, we made it to the end of this. Good job. Thank you for sticking around if you did, and if you didn't, you won't know that I'm saying this properly, but thanks for watching anyways. That's all I have for you today. Let me know if you've read any of these, what you thought about them. Yeah, I mean, I love hearing what you guys think about the books I've read, and I like being able to have a little chit chat about gripes and groans, and also the opposite of that, like really being excited about the things that we've read. Thanks so much for watching. I will see you later. Goodbye.